And you've heard their warnings. Republican lawmakers insisting the Obama administration's regulation nation is crushing business. Well, now there is a new report that may supply Republicans with the numbers to back up their claims. According to George Mason University researchers, the Code of Federal Regulations has ballooned from 71,224 pages in 1975 to 174,545 pages last year. Congressman Tom Price joins us. Good evening, sir.
Hey, Greta. Good to be with you.
Nice to have you. How do you describe this growth in regulation? And sort of a natural progression, or is this explosive or something else? How would you describe it?
No, the numbers clearly show that it's explosive. Now, first, it's important to say that regulations are important, but they're not benign. And so we need appropriate regulation, not oppressive regulation. And right now, the regulations in this country add about $2 trillion worth of cost to the American people, which means that's about the amount of the entire individual income tax. So in essence, we double the taxes on the American people just because of regulation. And in this administration, what we've seen is a huge explosion in the highest monetarily significant ones, those over $100 million. And those have been more in the last year than they have since they ever started watching what the cost of regulation was.
Yeah, we had a small businessman out about a week ago who runs a family bakery out in the Middle West, and he said his brother is part of the family bakery, that his job is just to do paperwork. And I thought, well, that's not very, if an employee just to do paperwork in a bakery?
Yeah, it's amazing. As a physician, I spent 20 years taking care of patients, and I remember the month when the number of individuals that we had in our office, in the back office, that never saw a patient, that never treated a patient at all, or even had their hands on taking care of patients, exceeded the number of people in the front office. And that was mostly because of regulation. And that's true in every single sector in our society now. Regulations are actually killing jobs and harming the economy. This is an important thing for people to appreciate, that when you have regulations and businesses are spending their money on making certain that they comply with the regulations, then they're not able to create jobs. And that's part of the unemployment picture that we see.
One of the statistics I read today is that in the President Obama's first administration, the first 4 years, that there were about 13,000 new rules and regulations, but that it was slightly less than President Bush in his first term. So this isn't just a President Obama situation. I mean, this is something that's been accumulating over, president after president after president. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, we've got it has happened through both Republican and Democrat administrations. The difference in this administration, however, is, as I mentioned before, the ones that are financially significant, those that cost the taxpayer, cost the American people more than $100 million, more in the last year than we've ever seen since they started keeping track of these kind of numbers. What that means is, again, that businesses after business are spending more money on regulation. That baker that you talked about, that you heard from, that individual spending more money on regulation, which means they can't invest in their business, they can't create jobs, they can't do the research and development.
We only have 30 seconds left, but wouldn't it make sense? I mean, there's no provision sort of to get rid of deadwood regulations and rules. It seems to be none. Maybe every time you all in the government pass a regulation, you get rid of two old ones that we don't use.
There are actually proposals to do just that, but there's something called the REINS Act, which says that if a regulation from the administration costs more than $100 million, it ought to come to Congress. Congress ought to have to sign off. There ought to be a cost-benefit analysis in all of these things. That's what happens in the private sector.
But that's $100 million to a big corporation, maybe like a 20,000 to a small business. I mean, there's got to be some way that we don't let the small business people get lost in the shuffle because they don't have the huge burden, the huge numbers that a big corporation would.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's $100 million in its aggregate, not just for one business, but $100 million effect on society. Because the businesses don't ultimately pay this cost, as you well know, Greta. It's the American people. And that's why I say we've in essence doubled the taxes on the American people without them even knowing it, because of the regulations that Washington has imposed on businesses.
Well, it's just extraordinary. You talk to any business person or anyone who works any job, everyone's got a story about some ridiculous rule or regulation. I'm not saying that some aren't good and important, but everybody's got a story.
No, you're absolutely right. And you would be amazed, or maybe you wouldn't. There's some individuals in Congress who actually believe that regulations haven't harmed businesses, haven't harmed employment. So I urge every single American to call their member of Congress, regardless of what you think they think, and let them know how harmful regulations are to your community, to the economy, to job creation, all the kinds of things that the American people know so well.
And of course, in terms of the number of regulations, isn't always necessarily the number of regulations. It's just another metric to look at is the impact of a particular regulation, which may be more punishing than 50 other ones. But anyway,
absolutely. You've talked about one of them, Obamacare, in the first half hour.
Yes, we did talk about that, and the law regulations there. Congressman, thank you, sir.